It's important that you understand the difference between a bodybuilder's big muscles and boxing type muscles.
A single punch from a professional boxer can generate more than 2,500 newtons of force. Try to picture that for a second. It's roughly equivalent to being struck by a fastball traveling 50 miles per hour, or comparable to the force involved in lifting 255 kilograms off the ground in one motion. That's not hyperbole. That's raw physics, generated entirely by a human body moving correctly, without a single machine or piece of equipment doing the work for it. I went digging into exactly how the sport's biggest names built the kind of muscle and power behind numbers like that fighters like Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather, and Manny Pacquiao, each one known for a completely different flavor of dominance inside the ring, and yet all three sharing a common thread underneath the surface. What follows is a breakdown of how they built strength without ever letting that strength slow them down or work against them once the rounds started stacking up. Who's behind this? I'm Tishi Fit, and this channel exists to break down exactly how to train like the athletes and characters people admire most. Today, we're taking apart the training systems behind explosive, punching power, how to build serious muscle for maximum strength without ever compromising your speed or your endurance in the ring. Strong doesn't always mean strong. You've seen the type at every gym, the guys with biceps stretching their sleeves, chests built like slabs of poured concrete, the kind of physique that looks like it could punch straight through drywall without even winding up first. But here's the uncomfortable truth about boxing specifically. Looking powerful and actually fighting powerfully are two completely different things, and they don't always show up in the same body, no matter how convincing the mirror makes it seem. Picture a fighter who spent months hammering the weight room, adding a genuine 20 pounds of pure muscle to his frame. He walks into the gym, feeling untouchable, practically superhuman, catching his reflection in the mirrored wall and liking what he sees. Then fight night arrives, and everything shifts. By the third round, all that added mass starts working against him instead of for him. His punches lose their snap, his hands drop lower with every exchange. His legs feel like they're dragging through sand, and the crowd can see it even before his corner does. The reason comes down to simple physiology. Added muscle mass doesn't just add power, it also raises the body's oxygen demand and accelerates the onset of fatigue. Which means the real formula isn't just more muscle. It's a careful balance between cardiovascular capacity, raw power, and flexibility working together in concert, rather than any one quality dominating the others. Peak performance requires both fast-twitch muscle fibers, built for short, explosive bursts, and slow-twitch fibers, built for sustained output over the full length of a fight. Take Conor McGregor as a case study here. Built like an absolute tank, all coiled muscle and one-shot power, but in fights that stretched past the early rounds, he's visibly struggled once the initial explosiveness stopped being enough on its own. That's largely because his training has leaned heavily toward developing fast-twitch capability, built specifically to end fights early and decisively rather than to grind through a full, extended contest. The trade-off is real. Leaning too hard into pure strength and explosiveness accelerates muscular fatigue, and that becomes a serious liability the moment a fight extends into the later rounds, where composure and conditioning start to matter more than raw force. In other words, chasing size and one-shot power at the expense of stamina and functional conditioning can absolutely backfire once a fight goes the distance and both fighters are still standing in round 8. This is exactly where functional strength training earns its place: compound movements, specifically things like weighted pull-ups and weighted squats, rather than the isolated curls and machine work that build size without transferring meaningfully into striking power. For back development, weighted pull-ups or lat pull-downs are particularly valuable, since they train many of the same muscles involved in throwing a punch, while simultaneously strengthening the upper back and shoulders that stabilize every punch thrown. Layering in barbell or dumbbell rows on top of that builds pulling strength and stabilizes the shoulder girdle further, which matters far more than it sounds like it should the first time a fighter absorbs a heavy counter. These aren't isolation movements, they're multi-joint exercises that train several muscle groups simultaneously, which makes them ideal for building full-body coordination rather than developing muscles in isolated silos that never quite talk to each other under fight conditions. From there, plyometric work adds the explosive layer box jumps, or plyometric push-ups, where you lower under control and then explode back upward with force, training the body to recruit muscle fibers on a hair trigger rather than gradually ramping into effort. And naturally, endurance training rounds out the picture. Long-distance running or classic road work remains a proven method, though cycling and swimming offer effective alternatives that still build serious cardiovascular capacity while adding some variety into the mix and sparing the joints from the repetitive pounding of pure road work. High-intensity interval training does something particularly valuable here. It replicates the actual rhythm of a real boxing match, stacking explosive effort against short recovery windows in a pattern that closely resembles 3-minute rounds separated by brief rest. And since not everyone gravitates toward long-distance running, brisk walking or light jogging can substitute effectively without sacrificing the underlying benefit. What actually matters is the repeated impact of bearing your own body weight through movement, which improves both aerobic and anaerobic conditioning simultaneously, rather than developing one system while neglecting the other. Once you're training functional strength, endurance, and explosive power together as a system rather than separately, you're essentially converting your body into a machine capable of sustaining output through long, grinding rounds, delivering real power deep into a fight without your tank running empty early, which is ultimately the entire difference between a fighter who fades and one who finishes. How a knockout actually happens. To understand exactly how to train for this kind of power, it helps to first break down the mechanics of a knockout punch itself. A punch was never just an arm movement. It's a full-body event, drawing on a very specific chain of muscles, working in precise sequence to produce real athletic output, and treating it as anything less than that is exactly how fighters end up with power that looks impressive in the mirror but doesn't translate once gloves are on. This is essentially what people mean when they talk about the kinetic chain. Put simply, every part of the body functions like a single link in a longer chain, each movement building directly on the one before it, transferring energy upward rather than losing it along the way. Your body, in this sense, functions as one continuous power generator, no different in principle from the way energy moves through any well-engineered mechanical system. During a punch, force originates at the floor, travels upward through the legs, transfers through a rapid, forceful hip rotation, and then channels into the upper body before finally driving through the fist toward the target, all of it moving through the kinetic chain at high speed, often in well under half a second from initiation to impact. That's precisely the mechanism we need to train for directly, which means focusing on exercises that engage the entire body simultaneously, rather than isolated muscle groups working independently of one another. Compound movements remain the gold standard here. Take the squat as an example. It's never purely a leg exercise when performed correctly. Done right, it activates the legs, the core, and even portions of the upper body, since the entire movement generates force starting from the ground upward, which mirrors almost exactly how power gets generated during a punch, right down to the sequencing. That's why movements like squats, deadlifts, and cleans matter so much. They force full-body engagement rather than isolated effort, and they teach the nervous system to coordinate multiple muscle groups the same way a real punch demands. For pure explosiveness specifically, plyometric training takes over jump squats, box jumps, movements built to teach the body how to generate maximum force in the shortest possible window of time, essentially training the nervous system to fire as fast as the muscles themselves are physically capable of. Then there's the core, and not just in the narrow sense of visible abs, but the entire midsection working as a coordinated unit rather than a decorative six-pack. This is genuinely where the magic of power transfer happens, and it's also the part most amateur training programs skip past far too quickly. When a punch is thrown, the core functions as the connective bridge, linking the lower body to the upper body without a strong, stable midsection. Real power gets left on the table before it ever reaches the fist, no matter how strong the legs or shoulders happen to be individually. Research has consistently linked dynamic trunk control and hip core contraction directly to increased power output in punching. Put simply, a stronger core translates directly into a harder punch, and there's real, measurable science backing that up rather than just gym folklore. Bruce Lee remains the clearest demonstration of this principle in action, decades before most of modern sports science caught up to what he was already doing intuitively. His legendary 1-inch punch was built entirely around total body integration to generate force from an almost impossibly short distance, defying what most observers assumed was physically possible from someone standing that close to their target. He relied on tools like isometric holds and dynamic tension work to build strength that was simultaneously functional and explosive, and that exact combination is what separates genuinely great fighters from merely good ones. When strength training and explosive movement training get combined properly, layered on top of each other rather than trained in isolation, the resulting power output is on a completely different level from what either quality could produce alone. The 3-day program. With the biomechanics covered, here's a complete 3-day training program built specifically to develop both muscle and usable power. Run this roughly 3 times per week alongside your existing martial arts training for the best results. Day 1, Explosive Foundations. Day 1 centers around regular squats, jump squats, explosive push-ups, and pull-ups performed in both wide grip and close grip variations, all chosen specifically to jolt the fast-twitch fibers awake early in the week before fatigue has a chance to blunt their responsiveness. For squats, begin from a standing position, lower under control, then drive upward explosively, rather than treating the movement as a slow, grinding grind through the sticking point. You can either perform standard squats with a strong focus on explosive output, or opt for jump squats as a more advanced variation once the standard version feels manageable. 4 to 5 sets should be sufficient. Throughout the movement, avoid letting your form break down, keep the back straight and the chest lifted the entire time. Since a rounded back under explosive load is exactly how injuries creep into an otherwise sound program. For push-ups, lower yourself under control until you're close to the floor, then push upward with real force rather than easing into the top position. For a harder variation, explode with enough force to lift your entire body off the ground. You can add a clap mid-air, or simply focus on driving your upper body upward with maximum intent, even without leaving the ground entirely. For pull-ups, adding weight creates additional challenge. Once bodyweight reps start feeling too easy, though standard bodyweight pull-ups are entirely sufficient on their own for most people, still building toward that point. If building punching power specifically is the goal, closed grip pull-ups are especially effective, and they carry the added benefit of strengthening the biceps and forearms that stabilize the wrist on impact. For building a wider, more developed back, wide grip pull-ups target the broader back muscles, particularly the lats, more directly. Generally speaking, closed grip pull-ups tend to be easier to execute and are especially well suited for strength training and conditioning work early in a program. All of these explosive movements are specifically designed to activate fast-twitch muscle fibers, the exact fibers responsible for knockout power, and the ones that atrophy fastest without regular explosive stimulus. Day 2, loaded strength. Day 2 shifts toward heavier loaded work, the kind of session where the numbers on the bar start doing more of the talking than raw explosiveness alone. The deadlift trains the entire posterior chain, running from the calves all the way up through the shoulders, and the trap bar variation specifically targets the complete line of force from the legs through the core and out through the fists, mirroring the same chain of transfer discussed earlier, almost link for link. The trap bar deadlift gets the nod over the conventional barbell version here specifically because the neutral grip position is considerably more shoulder-friendly, which reduces injury risk while still allowing for heavier overall loading and greater force output than a fighter's shoulders might otherwise tolerate under a straight bar. For the remaining exercises on this day, rep ranges matter quite a bit, and getting them wrong tends to push the outcome in the wrong direction entirely. If pure muscle size is the priority, aim for 4 to 6 repetitions per set. But for the sweet spot between building muscle and generating usable power, which is exactly what this program is built around, rather than pure aesthetics, 6 to 8 repetitions tends to land right in that ideal zone. Bench presses play a direct role in increasing punch velocity, while lat pull-downs build the rotational power behind hooks and uppercuts. Specifically, since retracting the opposite shoulder during a punch plays a major role in generating power, with the lats heavily involved in concentrating that energy through the movement and delivering it cleanly into the target. Day 3, plyometric power. Day 3 brings plyometric training into full focus, closing out the week with the sharpest, most explosive stimulus of the 3 sessions. Box jumps sit at the center of this session. Start with a relatively low box, bend the knees, and jump onto it using both feet simultaneously. Land softly, then step back down under control rather than jumping back off, since the landing mechanics here matter just as much as the jump itself for protecting the knees over a long training block. For weighted push-ups, a weighted vest works well, or simply loading a backpack with plates achieves the same effect without requiring specialized equipment. Somewhere around 5 to 10 kilograms is generally sufficient for most people, though more experienced athletes can push that number considerably higher once the movement stops feeling genuinely difficult. The focus throughout should stay on generating upward explosiveness, driven primarily through the chest and triceps, rather than simply grinding out slow, controlled repetitions the way a standard hypertrophy set might call for. Ball slams are excellent for developing both core strength and upper body power simultaneously, and they double as a legitimate release valve for whatever frustration built up earlier in the session. Lift the ball overhead with control, then drive it downward into the ground with full force, resetting fully between each repetition rather than rushing into the next one. Dumbbell thrusters combine a weighted squat directly with an overhead press, engaging essentially the entire body in a single continuous movement and leaving very little room for any muscle group to coast through the set. Begin in a squat position while holding a pair of dumbbells at shoulder height, then explode upward, pressing the dumbbells overhead as you rise to standing, treating the transition between the squat and the press as one fluid motion rather than 2 separate movements stitched together. For rep ranges on this final day, strength-focused work should stay in the 3 to 6 repetition range, while muscle growth work fits better in the 8 to 12 range. Power-focused exercises specifically should stay in the 3 to 5 repetition range, with the emphasis placed squarely on explosive intent in clean, controlled form throughout every single repetition, since sloppy speed work under fatigue tends to build bad habits faster than it builds real power. Wrapping up. Good luck putting this together, and let's get to work 3 days a week, stacked on top of the martial arts training you're already doing, is enough to start seeing the difference show up in both the mirror and the way your hands feel by the later rounds. If you made it this far, consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. Share your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one.